The Memphis Grizzlies have quickly become one of the most exciting young teams in the NBA. They don't get nearly as much coverage as other young teams like the Pelicans, Mavs, Sixers, or Nuggets, but their future is just as bright as these teams. In order to get into this position, the Grizzlies did have to get a little bit lucky. During the 2018-19 season, Memphis finished 33-49 and missed the playoffs. With that record, the Grizzlies had the 8th best odds at the number 1 pick. This was concerning for a lot of Grizzlies fans, as their first round pick that year was top 8 protected. If the pick fell out of the top 8, the Celtics would get the pick, but if not, the Celtics would end up getting Memphis's 2020 pick. The fear for the Grizzlies was that they would end up with the 7th or 8th pick and what a lot of people thought was a weak 2019 draft, then be bad the following year and convey a top 3 pick in the 2020 draft to the Boston Celtics. Memphis' GM actually went as far as to state that he didn't want to keep the 2019 draft pick, saying, "We'd like to convey this pick to Boston this year and get that in our rearview mirror and then move forward with a clean slate of picks." But as we know, they got lucky. The 2019 NBA draft lottery came, and the Grizzlies ended up landing the number 2 pick. Because of this, the Celtics ended up getting the Grizzlies' 2020 pick, which explains why Boston had the 14th pick in the draft, despite them making the Eastern Conference Finals last season. But I'm sure the Grizzlies aren't losing too much sleep over that, because their 2019 pick ended up getting them Morant, one of the best young point guards in the league. When you combine Ja with Jaron Jackson Jr., Brandon Clark, and all the other young guys on this team, there's a reason to believe that the Grizzlies could sneak into the playoffs this year. When I'm talking about most teams, I feel like it's usually relatively easy to kind of predict what the team's rotation is going to look like, but this Grizzlies team could go so many different ways this year. This is the rotation that I came up with for now. Jaron Jackson is going to miss the start of the season with injuries, so they'll probably have this starting lineup at the beginning of the year in his place until he comes back. The thing is, once Jaron Jackson comes back, I could possibly even see them starting him at the 5. I mean, I know so far in his career they've started him at the 4 next to Valanciunas, but I think the hope is that he can one day play at the 5, so maybe they just go all in with that experiment and say, okay, we're going to give you all these minutes at the 5, let's see what you can do with it. I could also see Delon Brooks possibly coming off the bench and them kind of using him as like a, shooter and scorer off the bench. There's just so many different lineups that this team could run, but that's ultimately a good thing though, because it means that the team has a lot of versatility, which is always good. The most important thing for the Grizzlies going forward is the development of Ja and Jaron Jackson. Morant had an amazing rookie season last year, and he'll be an all-star very, very soon. Morant is extremely fast, and he's really good at scoring at the rim because of his athleticism. His passing ability is also way beyond his years. He can make almost any pass, and he can do so with either hand. Morant is great in the pick and roll, he can make cross-court passes to shooters in the half-court, and he's an incredible passer in transition too. He also doesn't turn the ball over too much despite having high minutes and a high usage rate during his first season in the league. Despite being such a great young talent, there are 2 main things that Ja needs to work on: defense and his 3-point shooting. On the defensive end, Ja was not unplayable like a guy like Trae Young, but he was below average. Putting on some more muscle would definitely help him out on that end, but the good thing with Ja is that he does give good effort on the defensive end. In the NBA, there are players that either give effort on defense or they don't, and Ja is someone that does. Like I said, he'll need to get stronger, and his defensive IQ has to improve as well, but those are things that I think he'll improve upon with age. Morant also needs to improve as a 3-point shooter. He's not on Ben Simmons' level of poor shooting, but teams are going to continue to go under screens until he proves that he can consistently knock down the 3-point shot. Ja shot 33% from 3 his rookie season, which was below league average, but the biggest issue was that he didn't attempt very many. He needs to attempt around 4 to 5 threes per game next year in order to keep the defense honest. If he does that, he'll open up a lot more driving lanes for himself because defenses won't be as willing to sag off of him. The other young star on this team is Jaron Jackson Jr. When the Grizzlies drafted Jackson 4th overall, they weren't expecting him to be this good this early on the offensive end. Jackson is a great 3-point shooting big, he's athletic, and he can put the ball on the floor and attack off the dribble. Jackson is also great at running the floor, which complements a fast point guard like Morant very, very well. Despite being surprisingly good on the offensive end, Jackson has also been surprisingly disappointing on the defensive end. He's definitely not a bad defender, he's actually a pretty good one, but he does have some really bad habits that he needs to get rid of. Since coming into the league, Jackson has had a major fouling issue. For his career, Jackson has averaged 5.2 fouls per 36, which explains why he's never played more than 28 minutes per game in each of his first 2 seasons. That type of fouling issue is a massive issue because it really diminishes the good plays that he and his teammates make on the defensive end, and those types of bad fouls can really kill the momentum of a game. The other thing that Jackson really needs to improve on is his rebounding. Even though he's almost 7 feet tall, Jackson is yet to have averaged 5 rebounds per game for a season, which is really bad. Part of the reason he's had such low rebounding numbers can be attributed to the fact that he does play on the perimeter a lot on the offensive end, and on the defensive end, he has to guard 4s on the perimeter as well, but that's not really an excuse. When the Grizzlies drafted Jackson, the hope was that they would be able to turn him into a full-time center, but when Memphis has actually given him minutes at the 5, he's really struggled as a rebounder despite him being around the basket even more on the defensive end than when he plays the 4. In a perfect world, Jackson figures out his fouling and rebounding issues, and he and Brandon Clark can start next to one another in the front court. Hopefully he can improve on those weaknesses once he comes back from injury. This Grizzlies team also has a lot more young players on this team that may not have star potential but can still turn out to be good players. De'Anthony Melton is a really good defender, and if he can improve on his 3-point shot, he could be a really great 3-and-D player that is able to play next to Jamorant for the foreseeable future. Delon Brooks isn't as good as Melton on defense, but he's still a pretty good defender. Brooks is a lot better than Melton on the offensive end though. He's a good shooter and he's fresh off a season in which he averaged 16 points per game. But Brooks does need to improve his shot selection and his overall efficiency. Kyle Anderson is 27, but he moves like he's 37. Tyus Jones is a good playmaking point guard off the bench, and Justice Winslow has shown flashes as a good all-around player when healthy. I thought Desmond Bain was actually the steal in this year's draft. He's a great 3-point shooter, he can play in the pick and roll a little bit, and he has high defensive potential. If Melton never improves as a 3-point shooter, there's a good chance that Bain ends up becoming the starting shooting guard of the future for Memphis. Then there is Brandon Clark. Clark is easily the best young player on this team outside of Morant and Jackson. He's a really smart defensive player, and on the offensive end, he has a really nice floater, and he's great in the pick and roll as well. The only thing he really needs to improve on is his 3-point shot. Clark shot league average from 3 his rookie season, but he only really shot them when he was left wide open. Like I said earlier, hopefully Jaron Jackson can become good enough to start at the 5 so that Clark can be the starting 4 for this team going forward. Unfortunately for the Grizzlies, their lack of veteran leadership will likely be their downfall this season. After Jay Crowder was traded to Miami Heat last year, the Grizzlies ended up going 9-15 the rest of the way in the regular season. Part of their poor record came as a result of Jaron Jackson's injury in the bubble, but I think that Crowder's presence as a veteran in that locker room would have helped in the final stretch of the season. Going into this season, Memphis' roster has an average age of 24, and there are only 3 players on this roster that are 27 or older. On top of that, the average age of their coaching staff is just 42, and most of their coaches have not coached at the NBA level for very long. While having a young team doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be bad, it usually matters when you're talking about winning close games. Memphis had the 6th worst winning percentage in the league last year in games that were decided by 5 or less points. Unsurprisingly, some other teams that finished towards the bottom of that list were young teams like Minnesota, Dallas, and New Orleans. When you combine their youth with the impact that Jackson's injury will have on the team, I believe the Grizzlies will come out of the gate slowly. While I think they will pick it up once Jaron Jackson comes back, they'll probably be too far behind at that point to catch up and make the playoffs. There are just so many good teams that are in the West this year, so injuries and not having the ability to win close games is really going to determine where a team ends up in the standings. Because of this, I have Memphis finishing in 12th at 31-41. If they were healthy, they could realistically contend for the 8th seed, but because of their youth, Jaron Jackson's injury, and the depth of the West, I have them finishing where I have them. Going forward, I think the Grizzlies need to just let their young guys improve. They should look to add some more veterans going forward, but ultimately the development of their young players will be what makes them a playoff team in the future.